Have you ever sat alone at a restaurant, just you and your meal, while everyone around you seemed to be wrapped in conversation with someone else? In a world where eating has become a social performance, where Instagram stories document every shared appetizer, where lunch invitations measure your social worth and dinner reservations signal relationship status, some people actively choose solitude at the table. Not because they couldn't find company, not because their friends canceled, not because they're antisocial or awkward or nursing some invisible wound, but because they've discovered something about presence, about peace, about the relationship between self and sustenance that most people rushing through group conversations will never understand. Let's start with something most people get completely wrong. When we see someone eating alone, we assume loneliness. We assume social failure. We assume that something must have gone wrong in their life to land them at a table for one. We project our own fear of solitude onto them and imagine they must be suffering in silence. But psychology tells a completely different story. Research on solitary behavior reveals something surprising. People who regularly choose to eat alone often score higher on measures of self-awareness, emotional independence, and what psychologists call capacity for solitude, the ability to be genuinely content, even nourished by your own company. They're not avoiding connection. They're not deficient in social skills. They've simply developed a relationship with themselves that most people never bother to cultivate. And what they understand about presence might just change how you think about every meal you've ever rushed through while half listening to someone else's story. Let's start with something fundamental. Picture what actually happens when you sit down to eat with other people. You're at a restaurant with friends or colleagues. It's a Tuesday evening. The food arrives, steam rising from the plates, aromas filling the air. But you're not really there, not fully. You're listening to someone's story about their weekend. You're formulating your response before they've finished speaking. You're monitoring the social dynamics at the table. Who's talking too much? Who seems left out? Whether you should jump in or stay quiet? You're checking if the conversation has a natural pause where you can excuse yourself to use the restroom. You're wondering if you ordered the right thing, if your portion looks appropriate, if you're eating too fast or too slow. The meal becomes background noise. The food becomes fuel rather than experience. The flavors pass across your tongue almost unnoticed because your attention is fragmented across a dozen social computations happening simultaneously beneath your awareness. And this is what we call connection. This is what we prefer to solitude. Now imagine a different scene entirely. You're alone at a quiet corner table. The restaurant hums with distant conversation, but none of it requires your response. The food arrives. You look at it, really look at it. The colors on the plate, the way the sauce pools at the edges, the garnish someone carefully placed. You take a bite and notice the texture first, then the temperature, then the layers of flavor unfolding. There's no performance, no audience, no social calculation, just you and the experience of eating. This isn't loneliness. This isn't sadness dressed up as choice. This is presence. Pure, undivided, almost radical presence. Psychologists call this undivided attention, the increasingly rare ability to be fully engaged with a single experience without splitting your consciousness across multiple social obligations. Neuroscientists have mapped what happens in the brain during these moments of singular focus. The prefrontal cortex, usually overwhelmed by social processing, quiets down. The sensory regions light up with unusual intensity. The experience gets encoded more deeply into memory.
But for people who eat alone, this isn't a meditation technique they learn from an app. It's just how they prefer to experience a meal. It's just lunch. Here's what's fascinating. Studies on eating behavior have revealed that people who dine alone actually remember their meals better than those who eat in groups. They report higher satisfaction with food quality and demonstrate more mindful eating patterns. Their brains aren't distracted by social processing. Every sensory channel is fully available for the experience itself. They're not just eating, they're tasting. There's a difference most people have forgotten existed. But there's something deeper happening here, something that goes beyond the meal itself. Think about what it actually takes to sit alone in a public space and feel completely comfortable. You need a certain immunity to social judgment. You need to have looked at the possibility that strangers might pity you or wonder what's wrong with you, and decided that their assumptions are their problem, not yours. You need to have made peace with yourself as company. You need to have decided, consciously or unconsciously, that your own presence is enough. This is a form of psychological self-sufficiency that's becoming increasingly rare. In an age where we fill every moment with podcasts and notifications, where silence feels like failure and solitude feels like punishment, where we can't wait in line for coffee without scrolling through our phones, these individuals can sit in quiet with their own thoughts and find it nourishing rather than frightening. They've developed what researchers call the capacity to be alone, and it turns out this capacity is one of the strongest predictors of mental health and relationship satisfaction. Let that sink in for a moment. Now, let's talk about what this reveals about their inner world. People who eat alone often have rich internal lives. They're comfortable with their own thoughts because they've spent time with them. They don't need constant external stimulation because they've learned to generate their own engagement with the world. Their minds are not empty spaces that need to be filled with distraction. Their minds are companions. When you ask them what they think about during a solo meal, you don't get blank stares or uncomfortable deflection. You get answers that reveal something profound about how they process existence. They're observing the restaurant, the couple in the corner who seem to be fighting without words, the waiter who looks exhausted but keeps smiling, the way the light falls through the window at this particular hour. They're processing their day, not anxiously but thoughtfully, turning experiences over in their mind like stones in a stream. They're having conversations with themselves that would seem strange spoken aloud, but feel completely natural in the privacy of their own consciousness. This isn't overthinking, this isn't rumination, this is a mind that knows how to keep itself company. And it's a skill that most people never develop because they never give themselves the chance. But here's the paradox that most people miss entirely. Individuals who are comfortable eating alone often have deeper, more meaningful relationships than those who can't bear solitude. This seems contradictory until you understand the psychology underneath. When you're comfortable alone, you don't enter relationships from a place of desperation. You don't cling to friendships because you're terrified of empty evenings. You don't stay in connections that drain you because the alternative feels unbearable. You choose people, deliberately, because you genuinely want their specific company, not because you need any company at all. Researchers studying attachment patterns have found that people with high solitude capacity report greater relationship satisfaction, more secure attachment styles, and better conflict resolution skills. It turns out that being complete on your own is the foundation for building something meaningful with someone else. You're not looking for someone to fill your emptiness, you're inviting someone into your fullness. And that's a completely different kind of connection.
Consider what happens every time someone chooses to eat alone when they could easily have found company. They're making a statement, even if they don't realize it. They're saying that their own presence has value, that a meal deserves attention, that not every moment needs to be filled with social performance, that they don't need an audience to enjoy an experience. In a culture that treats solitude as something to be fixed, as a problem to be solved with more plans and more people and more noise, these individuals have opted out of that anxiety entirely. They've questioned the assumption that alone means lonely, and they've discovered that the assumption was wrong. Let's address the social perception directly, because there is one. Yes, there's a stigma. Eating alone in public can trigger that uncomfortable feeling of being watched, judged, pitied by strangers who project their own fears onto your empty chair. Most people avoid solo dining specifically because of this discomfort. The anticipated judgment is enough to keep them ordering takeout they don't want, or accepting lunch invitations with people they don't particularly enjoy. But those who regularly dine solo have pushed through that barrier. They've felt the initial discomfort and discovered something on the other side that made it worthwhile. Freedom. The freedom to eat what you actually want without negotiating. The freedom to sit in silence without filling it with words you don't mean. The freedom to take as long as you want or leave when you choose. The freedom to be exactly who you are without performing for an audience that, truthfully, isn't paying nearly as much attention as you feared. Here's what's interesting. This tolerance for social discomfort extends far beyond restaurants. People who can comfortably eat alone can often walk into parties without a +1, travel solo to foreign countries, spend entire weekends without plans. They've developed a psychological independence that doesn't rely on external validation to feel secure in their identity. The muscle they build sitting alone with their soup transfers to every area of their life. What researchers now recognize as crucial for mental health, the ability to self-soothe, to be comfortable in your own head, to not need constant external reassurance, was just them enjoying a quiet lunch. They weren't practicing psychological techniques, they were just eating, and they were building something profound. There's also something almost meditative about the solo dining experience that deserves attention. Think about what happens when you eat alone in a public space. You become an observer of life rather than a participant in performance. You watch human nature unfold around you without being responsible for any of it. The stressed businessman at the next table, the first date couple trying too hard, the elderly woman who eats the same meal at the same time every day because ritual creates meaning. You see things that people caught in conversation miss entirely. You notice patterns. You understand something about the human condition that's invisible when you're inside the social dance. This isn't detachment, it's perspective. And perspective is something our hyper-connected world systematically destroys. Here's what people who eat alone understand that others don't. Loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. They sound similar. They look similar from the outside, but they're as different as hunger and fasting. Loneliness is the pain of unwanted isolation. It's reaching for connection and finding nothing. It's being surrounded by people and still feeling invisible. Loneliness hurts because it's not chosen. Solitude is the peace of chosen presence with yourself. It's deliberately stepping back from the noise to hear your own thoughts. It's being alone and feeling complete. Solitude nourishes because it's intentional. You can be desperately lonely in a crowded room full of friends, and you can be perfectly content at a table for one with nothing but good food and your own mind for company. These individuals have learned to distinguish between the two. They know when they want company and when they want themselves. They don't confuse social activity with genuine connection. They don't mistake busyness for fulfillment. They don't assume that more people means more happiness. And in a world that's more connected than ever, yet somehow lonelier than ever before, that distinction might be the most valuable psychological skill you can develop. So what does all this add up to? People who eat alone aren't lonely. They aren't antisocial. They aren't damaged or deficient or waiting to be fixed. They've simply developed a relationship with themselves that most people avoid their entire lives. They've learned that presence doesn't require an audience. They've discovered that some experiences are richer when they're unshared. These individuals carry within them something that's becoming increasingly rare in our hyper-connected, notification-addicted, and constantly performing world. A quiet comfort with their own company that comes from knowing, truly knowing, that they are enough. A capacity for stillness that most people have forgotten how to access. A presence that doesn't need to be witnessed to feel real. Their minds were shaped by chosen solitude, strengthened by resistance to social pressure, calibrated by countless peaceful meals where the only conversation was internal, and refined by the simple act of enjoying their own company. They're living proof that presence doesn't require an audience, that some of life's richest moments happen when no one is watching, that the relationship you have with yourself sets the tone for every other relationship you'll ever have, that being alone and being lonely are not the same thing, no matter how often our culture confuses them. Solitude isn't emptiness, silence isn't awkwardness, and a table for one isn't a failure to find company. Sometimes it's the most deliberate choice you can make, a decision to be fully present with your own life, even just for the length of a meal. A quiet rebellion against a world that insists you should never be enough on your own. That's not loneliness, that's not sadness, that's self-possession, that's peace. Drop a comment and share your story, and if this resonated with you, hit like and subscribe because we dive deep into psychology that actually explains how your mind works. See you next time.